When I bought my dream house in Oakridge Heights last spring, I thought I'd finally found my slice of paradise. A beautiful colonial-style home nestled at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac, surrounded by towering oak trees and backing up to a protected nature reserve. The kind of place where you could actually escape the chaos of city life and feel at peace. But I had no idea this perfect home would become the center of a nightmare that would end with my house being deliberately set on fire and a criminal conspiracy that went deeper than I could have ever imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Looking back now, I can't believe how quickly everything spiraled out of control. What started as simple harassment from a group claiming to be a legitimate HOA turned into systematic intimidation, vandalism, and ultimately arson. But here's the truly terrifying part. They didn't just try to burn down my house, they tried to make it look like an accident. And when that failed, they attempted to paint me as the villain who was trying to destroy their community. If it wasn't for my security cameras and a stroke of luck that kept me away from home that night, I might not be here to tell this story. I remember the day I first toured the house like it was yesterday. My realtor, Jessica, couldn't stop raving about what a rare find it was. "You won't find another property like this in Riverside County," she insisted. "No HOA breathing down your neck, no ridiculous rules about what color you can paint your mailbox." That was actually one of the main selling points for me. After living in an HOA-controlled condo for 5 years and dealing with their petty power, trips, I had sworn never to buy a property with HOA involvement again. The previous owners, an elderly couple moving to Florida to be closer to their grandchildren, had maintained the house beautifully. The landscaping was immaculate, with mature rose bushes lining the front walkway and a vegetable garden in the backyard that I couldn't wait to take over. During the final walkthrough, Mrs. Martinez even shared her secret for keeping the roses so vibrant, a special blend of coffee grounds and eggshells she'd perfected over the years. The closing process went smoothly. My lawyer reviewed every document thoroughly, confirming there were no HOA entanglements or hidden restrictions. I even double-checked the property records at the county office myself. Everything was clear. On March 15th, I got the keys to my new home, and for the first 6 weeks, life was absolutely perfect. I spent my weekends working in the garden, planted new herbs, and even started planning a small koi pond for the backyard. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, always waving as they passed by. The family next door, the Thompsons, even brought over a welcome basket filled with local honey and homemade bread. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found such an ideal place to put down roots. But then came that fateful Saturday morning, in late April, when 3 people walked up my driveway uninvited and introduced themselves as the board members of the Oakridge Heights Homeowners Association. That moment marked the beginning of a 6-month ordeal that would test my resolve, drain my savings, and ultimately lead to a criminal investigation that exposed decades of corruption and illegal activities in my seemingly peaceful suburban neighborhood. If I had known then what I know now, about the illegal property scheme they were running, about the other homeowners they had forced out over the years, about the lengths they would go to maintain their power, I might have run far and fast. But I didn't run. Instead, I stood my ground and fought back. And in doing so, I uncovered a web of deception that would shock our entire community and lead to multiple arrests, including the HOA board members who tried to burn down my house. Those first 6 weeks in my new home were everything I'd dreamed of and more. Every morning, I'd wake up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, the gentle rustling of oak leaves creating dancing shadows on my walls. The previous owners had installed these beautiful plantation shutters that filtered the light perfectly. It felt like waking up in a high-end resort, except this was actually my home, My daily routine quickly fell into a peaceful rhythm. I'd start each morning on my back deck with a cup of locally roasted coffee from this little shop downtown called Bean and Barrel. The morning air was always crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the nature reserve behind my property. Sometimes I'd spot deer grazing at the edge of the woods, or watch hummingbirds darting between the feeders I'd hung from the oak branches. I spent those early weeks really making the place my own. The previous owners, the Martinezes, had left me detailed notes about the house. Everything from the best settings for the sprinkler system to which local handyman to call for specific repairs. They'd even drawn up a maintenance calendar marking when different plants in the garden needed attention. It was clear they had loved this home, and I was determined to honor their care by maintaining it just as beautifully. The neighborhood itself seemed perfect too. Unlike my previous condo complex, where neighbors barely acknowledged each other's existence, people here were genuinely friendly. The Thompsons next door, Mark, Sarah, and their 2 kids, would wave and chat whenever they saw me outside. Their youngest, Emma, was especially fascinated by my garden and would often peer over the fence, asking questions about the different plants. Across the street, there was an elderly gentleman named Mr. Chen who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. He'd stop by occasionally while walking his golden retriever Max and share stories about how the area had developed over the decades. According to him, Oakridge Heights had started as a small farming community in the 1950s before gradually transforming into the suburban haven it was today. I threw myself into home improvement projects with enthusiasm. The house was in great shape overall, but there were little touches I wanted to add to make it truly mine. I repainted the kitchen in a warm sage green that complemented the granite countertops perfectly. I installed new light fixtures in the dining room. These beautiful vintage-inspired pendant lamps I'd found at a local antique shop. Every small change made the house feel more and more like home. The vegetable garden became my weekend passion project. Mrs. Martinez had left behind thriving tomato plants, cucumber vines, and an impressive herb garden. I added my own touches, building raised beds for new vegetables, installing a drip irrigation system, and creating a small composting area in the corner of the yard. I even started researching beekeeping, thinking it would be perfect for the far corner of the property. My neighbors seemed to appreciate my efforts. Several stopped by to compliment the improvements I was making. Mrs. Thompson brought over homemade salsa, made with tomatoes I'd given her from my garden. Mr. Chen shared cuttings from his prized jasmine plants, saying they would add a beautiful fragrance to my garden in the spring. It felt like I was becoming part of a real community. Even my commute to work improved dramatically. Instead of the hour-long slog through city traffic I'd endured from my condo, my new home was just 20 minutes from the architectural firm where I worked. The drive took me through scenic backroads lined with old-growth trees, past small farms and historic properties. It was like a peaceful meditation session before and after work. Looking back now, I can see how this perfect facade made what came next even more shocking. Every friendly wave, every casual conversation with a neighbor, every peaceful morning on my deck, it all served to make the betrayal that much more devastating. Because underneath this picture-perfect suburban dream, a nightmare was brewing. And those same neighbors who smiled and brought welcome baskets would soon turn their backs when I needed support the most. I just wish I'd noticed the subtle signs earlier. The way some neighbors would exchange knowing glances when I mentioned being HOA free. The slight hesitation in their voices when I talked about my renovation plans. The careful way Mr. Chen had avoided certain topics when discussing the neighborhood's history. But I was too caught up in my newfound happiness to see the red flags. Too busy planning my future to notice the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The week before everything changed, life was running like clockwork. I'd just finished a major project at work, designing a sustainable community center that had earned our firm considerable praise, and decided to reward myself by taking a long weekend to focus on my home projects. I'd ordered supplies for the koi pond I was planning, and the local landscaping company was scheduled to start the excavation the following month. Everything was falling perfectly into place. That Thursday evening, I hosted a small dinner party for some colleagues from the architectural firm. Everyone raved about the house, especially the improvements I'd made to the back garden. My boss, David, particularly loved the pergola I'd built over the deck, commenting on how it perfectly framed the view of the nature reserve. "You really lucked out finding this place," he said, sipping his wine. "Properties like this are rare. No HOA restrictions backing up to protected land. It's like finding a unicorn in today's market." The Thompsons had offered to watch my dog, Luna, during the dinner party, since she tends to get overexcited around guests. When I went to pick her up afterward, Sarah Thompson seemed slightly distracted. She kept glancing toward the street while we chatted, and there was something off about her usual warmth. At the time, I chalked it up to it being late, or maybe she was dealing with some personal stress. Looking back now, I realize she must have known what was coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Friday morning, I was up, early as usual, enjoying my coffee on the deck. Mr. Chen walked by with Max, but instead of stopping for our usual chat, he hurried past with just a quick wave. It struck me as odd. He'd never passed up the chance to talk about his latest gardening adventures before. Later that same day, I noticed a group of people I didn't recognize walking slowly past my house, pointing and talking in hushed tones. They were well-dressed, carrying what looked like clipboards or folders, but they quickly dispersed when they saw me watching from the window. I spent Saturday morning working in the garden, adding new soil to the raised beds and planting the fall vegetables I'd started from seed. The weather was perfect. Crisp autumn air, clear blue skies, and just enough breeze to keep comfortable while working outside. I remember feeling so content, so at peace with everything. I'd finally achieved the life I'd always wanted. A beautiful home, a thriving garden, friendly neighbors, and complete freedom to make my property exactly what I wanted it to be. Around noon, I decided to take a break and run to the local hardware store. I needed some additional supplies for a trellis I was building for my climbing roses. The store owner, Mike, who I'd gotten to know pretty well over the past weeks, seemed unusually quiet during our interaction. When I asked about ordering some custom-cut lumber for my next project, he hesitated before saying, "You might want to hold off on any major changes for a while." Before I could ask what he meant, he quickly changed the subject. Looking back, I should have picked up on these subtle changes in behavior from the people around me. The way the normally chatty cashier at Bean and Barrel barely made eye contact that morning. How the usual group of joggers who passed by my house every day had suddenly started taking a different route. Even Luna seemed more alert than usual, barking at every sound and movement outside. But I was too absorbed in my plans and projects to notice these warning signs. I spent that afternoon sketching out designs for the koi pond, researching different filter systems, and planning where to place the underwater lights. I even started a spreadsheet to track the various species of koi I wanted to add once the pond was established. I remember feeling excited about sharing the finished project with my neighbors, imagining summer evenings spent entertaining by the water. That evening, I worked late in the garden, taking advantage of the last bits of daylight. As the sun set, I stood back to admire my work. The neat rows of vegetables, the thriving herb garden, the rose bushes beginning to climb their new supports. Everything was exactly as I'd envisioned it. I remember thinking, this is perfect. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. If I'd known that this would be the last peaceful evening I'd spend in my garden, the last time I'd feel completely at ease in my own home, maybe I would have savored it more. Maybe I would have taken pictures of everything, documented how it all looked before the nightmare began. Because by this time tomorrow, my understanding of this neighborhood, my trust in my neighbors, and my sense of security would be shattered completely. Sunday morning started like any other. I was in my front yard, pruning the hydrangeas and cleaning up some fallen leaves, when I noticed a black SUV slowly cruising down the street. It passed my house once, then circled back around 10 minutes later. On its third pass, it finally pulled into my driveway. The tinted windows rolled down, revealing 3 people I'd never seen before. They emerged from the vehicle with an air of authority that immediately set me on edge. The woman in front, probably in her early 60s, wore an expensive-looking navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio. Behind her were 2 men, one tall and lean with silver hair, the other shorter and stockier with a meticulously trimmed beard. They approached me with practiced smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Good morning," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, president of the Oakridge Heights Homeowners Association. These are my colleagues, Richard Sterling and James Cooper." She gestured to the men beside her. "We've been meaning to stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood properly." I felt my stomach tighten. An HOA. That couldn't be right. I still had dirt on my gardening gloves when I shook her hand, and I noticed her slight grimace at the contact. "There must be some mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice friendly but firm. "This property isn't part of any HOA. That was actually one of the main selling points when I bought it." Victoria's smile tightened. "Oh dear," she said, exchanging glances with her companions. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Oakridge Heights has been an HOA-governed community since 1992. Every property within our boundaries is required to be part of the association." The taller man, Richard, stepped forward, opening a large manila envelope. "We have all the documentation right here," he said, pulling out what looked like a map. "As you can see, your property falls well within the HOA jurisdiction." He pointed to my house on the map, which was indeed inside a red boundary line. Felt my heart rate increasing. "That's impossible." I had my lawyer review everything before closing. There was no mention of an HOA in any of the paperwork. None. I pulled off my gardening gloves, trying to maintain my composure. "And the previous owners never said anything about this." James, the shorter man, cleared his throat. "The Martinezes were negligent in their disclosure obligations. It's unfortunate, but their oversight doesn't change the legal reality. Your property is part of our HOA and has been since the association was established." Victoria opened her portfolio, pulling out a stack of papers. "We've brought a copy of our bylaws and registration forms. The annual dues are $750, payable quarterly. We'll need you to sign these today to begin the process of bringing your property into compliance." I took a step back, my mind racing. "I'm not signing anything. This doesn't make any sense. If there was an HOA, it would have come up in the title search, the property records, something." "Sometimes these things slip through the cracks," Victoria said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "But I assure you, this is all completely legal and binding. We can have our attorney contact yours if necessary." I looked at the papers she was trying to hand me, then at their expectant faces. Something felt very, very wrong about this situation. "I'll need to review this with my lawyer," I said firmly. "I'm not signing anything today." Richard's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. "We strongly recommend you cooperate with the association, Mr. Mitchell. Things tend to go smoother for homeowners who work with us rather than against us." The implied threat in his tone was unmistakable. I felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. "Thank you for stopping by," I said, taking a step toward my front door. "But like I said, I'll need to review this with my lawyer. Please don't come onto my property again without an invitation." Victoria's smile vanished completely. "We'll give you some time to reconsider your position, but understand this: every property in Oakridge Heights is part of our association. No exceptions." She placed her business card on top of my mailbox. "Call us when you're ready to be reasonable." I watched them climb back into their SUV and drive away, my mind spinning. As soon as they were out of sight, I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. While it rang, I noticed Mr. Chen watching from his front porch across the street. When our eyes met, he quickly went inside and closed his door. That's when I realized this wasn't just about an HOA trying to claim authority over my property. There was something deeper going on here, something that had my neighbors scared into silence. I just had no idea yet how far these people would go to maintain their control over Oakridge Heights. My lawyer, Rachel Matthews, agreed to meet me first thing Monday morning. I'd worked with her during the home purchase, and she'd been thorough in reviewing every document. When I arrived at her office, I brought everything the HOA board members had left with me, along with my original closing documents and property records. "This doesn't add up," Rachel said, spreading the papers across her desk. She pulled up my property records on her computer and compared them to the HOA's map. "Look at these filing dates. The HOA claims they've had jurisdiction since 1992, but your property wasn't even subdivided from the original farmland until 1995. And here," she pointed to a section of the HOA bylaws they'd given me, "these signatures don't match the county records from that time period." I felt a mix of relief and unease. So they're lying. They can't force me to join. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "It's more complicated than that. Everything about this HOA seems odd. The documentation they provided is inconsistent. Some pages look legitimate, others show clear signs of alteration. I'm going to contact the county recorder's office and have them pull the original HOA incorporation documents." While Rachel made some calls, I checked my email on my phone. There was already a message from Victoria Blackwood. "Following up on our conversation yesterday, we expect your signed registration forms and first quarterly payment by end of week. Failure to comply will result in immediate fines and possible legal action." Rachel hung up the phone, frowning. "That's strange. The recorder's office says they can't locate the original HOA documents. They're showing as misplaced during digitization. I've never heard of that happening before." She made a few more calls while I sat there, growing increasingly anxious. Finally, she turned back to me. "I've talked to some colleagues who've dealt with property issues in your area. There are rumors about this HOA. Nothing concrete enough to take legal action, but enough to concern me. Several homeowners have tried to challenge them over the years. None of the cases made it to court." "What happened to them?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. They all moved away, suddenly. One colleague mentioned a client who was adamant about fighting the HOA, then abruptly dropped the case and sold their house well below market value. Rachel gathered the papers into a neat stack. "My advice: document everything. Get security cameras if you don't already have them. Save every email, every piece of mail, every voicemail. Record any interactions with HOA members, as long as you're in a public space." I showed her the business card Victoria had left. "What should I tell them?" "I'll draft a formal response, citing the lack of HOA disclosure during sale and requesting proof of their legal authority over your property. That should buy us some time to figure out what's really going on here." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But be careful. Something about this situation feels wrong. These people aren't following normal HOA protocols." On my way home from Rachel's office, I stopped at the local coffee shop, needing some time to process everything. As I waited for my order, I overheard two elderly women talking in hushed tones at a nearby table. "Did you hear about the new owner on Oak Hollow Drive?" one whispered. The one who's causing trouble with the association? Victoria was talking about it at Bridge Club, the other replied. Said he's being difficult. You know what happened to the last one who tried to fight them. They noticed me looking their way and immediately fell silent. When I got my coffee and walked past their table, they avoided eye contact completely. Back home, I found another surprise waiting for me. A bright orange violation notice had been stuck to my front door. Urgent. Multiple infractions observed. Non-compliant landscaping, unauthorized garden structures, unapproved exterior paint color. Total fines, $1,200. Due immediately. I pulled the notice down, my hands shaking with anger. The paint color was original to the house. The garden structures had been here when I bought it. None of these violations made any sense. I took photos of the notice and sent them to Rachel, then went inside to check my security cameras. That's when I discovered they'd done more than just leave a notice. The footage showed James Cooper, the HOA board member, walking around my property while I was at the lawyer's office, taking photos and making notes. He'd even tried to peek through my windows. The sense of violation made my skin crawl. These people had no legal right to be on my property, yet they were acting like they owned it. As I watched the footage of James methodically documenting my violations, I realized this was just the beginning. They were building their case against me, creating a paper trail of infractions to justify whatever they were planning next. I called Rachel again and sent her the security footage. While I waited for her to call back, I noticed something else, unsettling. The Thompsons, who usually had their kitchen lights on by this time of evening, had their house completely dark. Through their front window, I could see them sitting in their living room, the blue glow of a TV illuminating their faces. When I waved, trying to catch their attention, they quickly drew their curtains closed. Over the next week, a clear pattern of harassment emerged. Every morning, I'd find new violation notices plastered to my door, each more ridiculous than the last. Unapproved mailbox design, non-regulation house numbers, excessive bird activity due to unauthorized feeders. The fines kept mounting. $500 here, $750 there. Within days, they claimed I owed over $5,000 in penalties. But it wasn't just the notices. I started noticing suspicious activities around my property at specific times. Every day at 9:15 a.m., that black SUV would cruise by, someone inside photographing my house. At 2:30 p.m., James Cooper would walk his dog past my property, meticulously noting something on his tablet. And like clockwork, at 4:45 p.m., Victoria Blackwood herself would drive by in her Mercedes, slowing to a crawl in front of my house. I documented everything in a detailed spreadsheet, times, dates, descriptions of each incident. The pattern was too precise to be random. They were building something, creating a paper trail for whatever they had planned next. But it wasn't until I reviewed a week's worth of security footage that I noticed something truly disturbing. They weren't just watching my house, they were monitoring my schedule. They knew exactly when I left for work, when I returned, even which days I went grocery shopping. I caught them testing my reactions too. One day, they'd leave a notice in the morning to see how quickly I'd remove it. The next day, they'd wait until evening, probably checking if I was monitoring my property throughout the day. Rachel, my lawyer, was growing increasingly concerned. This level of surveillance isn't normal, even for aggressive HOAs, she said during our daily check-in call. I've been doing some digging into property records around Oakridge Heights. In the past decade, 23 homes have been sold under unusual circumstances. All of them involved homeowners who'd initially refused to join the HOA. She sent me the records, and I spent that evening mapping out the sales. A disturbing picture emerged. The homes formed a perfect circle around the neighborhood's central area, like a slowly tightening noose. My house was one of the few remaining properties in that ring that wasn't under HOA control. I decided to dig deeper into the history of these sales. The county property records website was surprisingly unhelpful. Most of the relevant documents were listed as temporarily unavailable or missing during digital conversion. But I got lucky with old newspaper archives at the local library's website. One article from 2018 caught my attention. Local homeowner drops lawsuit against Oakridge Heights HOA. The homeowner, Michael Peterson, had accused the HOA of harassment and fraudulent claims of authority. The article mentioned he had substantial evidence of wrongdoing. Then suddenly, he withdrew his lawsuit and sold his house to a company called Oakridge Development LLC, a company I discovered was registered to Richard Sterling's wife. I was starting to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about forcing me to join their HOA. They were systematically acquiring properties in a specific pattern. But why? I pulled up satellite images of the neighborhood from different years. The changes were subtle but significant. Every house they'd acquired had been extensively renovated, not for residential use, but for something else. Extra parking spaces, corporate-style landscaping, modified entrances. That night I received an email from an anonymous account. If you're researching the HOA, check City Council records from 1992-1995. Focus on zoning changes. Be careful who you talk to. They have eyes everywhere. The next morning I took a sick day from work and drove to the city archives. The clerk seemed nervous when I requested the records, but eventually brought out several dusty boxes. Most of the documents were mundane city council minutes, but buried in a folder marked Proposed Development Plans. I found something interesting. A developer had tried to build a commercial complex in Oakridge Heights in the early 90s. The project was rejected due to residential zoning restrictions. The developer's name, Victoria Blackwood's late husband. The proposed location matched perfectly with the pattern of homes the HOA had acquired. As I was photographing these documents with my phone, I noticed a man watching me from between the shelves. When I looked up, he quickly disappeared. 10 minutes later, I got a text from an unknown number. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Last warning. I rushed home, my mind racing with connections. They weren't just harassing me, they were following a decades-old plan. My house, like the others they'd targeted, was a piece in a larger puzzle. The HOA wasn't really an HOA at all. It was a front for something much bigger. When I pulled into my driveway, I found Victoria Blackwood waiting for me. She was sitting on my front porch like she owned it, that fake smile plastered on her face. "We need to talk," she said, standing up, "about your property's future in our community." Victoria's presence on my porch felt like an invasion, but I knew I needed to keep my cool. "You're trespassing," I said, staying by my car. "Please leave my property." She laughed, a cold, calculated sound. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, we've been more than patient with you. But after your little investigation at the city archives today, it's clear we need to have a frank discussion." She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo. It was me at the archives, taken just hours ago. "We know exactly what you've been looking into." My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Then you know I've found proof that your HOA has no legal authority here." "Legal authority?" She smiled, pocketing her phone. "Let me tell you. What's going to happen? You're going to sign these papers," she held up a folder, "transferring your property to Oakridge Development LLC for a very generous price of $450,000. "My house is worth twice that," I said, though I knew this wasn't really about money. "Consider the alternative. Those fines you've accrued. They'll keep mounting. We'll put liens on your property. Your credit will be destroyed. Your professional reputation? I wonder what your architectural firm would think about an employee involved. In a messy legal battle, things can get very uncomfortable very quickly." I stood my ground. "Is that what you did to Michael Peterson and the others who refused to sell?" Her eyes narrowed. You really should have taken our earlier offers. This could have been so much easier. She placed the folder on my porch swing. You have 24 hours to sign. After that, we stop playing nice. After she left, I went inside and called Rachel immediately. When I described what happened, she was silent for a long moment. This is serious, she finally said. They're not even pretending to be a legitimate HOA anymore. They're openly threatening. We need to go to the police. Will they do anything? I asked, remembering how the other cases had mysteriously disappeared. Probably not immediately, but we need a paper trail. Document everything. I'm going to file for an emergency restraining order first thing tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Victoria's confidence bothered me. They had to know their threats were illegal. Why weren't they worried about evidence? Unless I got up and started reviewing my security camera footage from the past week. There, Tuesday afternoon, while I was at work. James Cooper walking around my property again, but this time he was holding something that looked like a scanning device. He spent several minutes pointing it at my walls and windows. I zoomed in on the footage and froze. The device had a familiar logo, Stealth Tech Solutions. I'd worked with their equipment in my architectural firm. They made high-end surveillance gear, including thermal imaging cameras that could see through walls. Suddenly paranoid, I grabbed a flashlight and started examining my house. In the living room, behind an outlet cover, I found it, a tiny microphone, professionally installed. There was another in the kitchen, hidden in a smoke detector. They'd bugged my house. My hands shaking, I opened my laptop and did a deep scan of my home network. Multiple unauthorized devices showed up. They hadn't just bugged my house. They'd hacked my Wi-Fi, my security cameras, everything. They'd been watching and listening to every move I made. I drove to a 24-hour diner across town, not trusting my own house anymore. Over coffee, I started piecing it together. The satellite images I'd found, the pattern of property acquisitions, the modified houses. It all pointed to something bigger than just real estate development. Using the diners. Wi-Fi, I dug deeper into Oakridge Development LLC. The company had received massive wire transfers from offshore accounts. Building permits had been filed and mysteriously approved without public hearings. And the modifications to the acquired homes, they weren't random. When I overlaid the plans with city infrastructure maps, a pattern emerged. They were creating something underneath the neighborhood. The acquired properties formed a perfect circle around a central point, and each modified home had subtle changes that could accommodate underground access. The HOA wasn't just a front for real estate development. It was cover for something much bigger. My phone buzzed. An email from the anonymous account, Loading Dock. Behind the old mall. Tonight at 3 a.m. Come alone if you want to know the truth. Don't bring your phone. I knew it could be a trap, but I also knew I might not get another chance to understand what was really happening. I drove home, parked my car in the garage, and checked my security cameras. The black SUV was parked 2 blocks away watching my house. Good. I slipped out my back door through the nature reserve and caught a rideshare from the gas station on the other side. As I headed toward the old mall, I realized there was no turning back. Whatever I discovered tonight would either give me the leverage I needed to fight back or put me in even more danger. But I had to know the truth about what was really happening in Oakridge Heights. The old mall was a ghost of its former self, its empty parking lot illuminated only by a few flickering security lights. As I approached the loading dock area, every instinct screamed that this was a trap. I'd left my phone at home as instructed, but I was wearing a small voice recorder hidden in my jacket, a precaution Rachel had insisted on after Victoria's threats. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard footsteps echoing from the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows. Mr. Chen, My elderly neighbor. He looked different from his usual friendly self. His face was drawn with worry, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. "We don't have much time. They monitor my movements too." "You sent the anonymous messages?" I asked, still keeping my distance. He nodded. "I've been watching them operate for 30 years. I was on the original city council when Robert Blackwood, Victoria's husband, first proposed his development. A project. What they told the public was a lie. The commercial complex was never the real goal." A distant car engine made us both freeze, but it passed without turning into the lot. Mr. Chen continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "In 1992, they discovered something under Oakridge Heights during a geological survey, something valuable enough to spend decades acquiring properties in a specific pattern. The HOA was created as a cover, a way to force people out when they wouldn't sell willingly." "What did they find?" I asked. "A massive cave system, but that's not all. There are rare earth minerals down there, the kind used in advanced technology, worth billions. But they couldn't mine it traditionally. The whole neighborhood would have to be evacuated. So they devised a long-term plan. Buy key properties, build underground access points, extract the minerals in secret." He pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's here. Geological surveys, secret mining permits, shell company records. I've been collecting evidence for years, but I was too afraid to act. After what they did to my wife." A sound from behind the loading dock made us both turn. Mr. Chen quickly pressed the USB drive into my hand. "Ellen Chen wasn't killed by a random home invasion in 2015. She found their documents, threatened to expose them. They made it look like a burglary gone wrong." My blood ran cold. "Why? Are you telling me this now?" "Because you're the last property they need. The minerals under your land are the richest deposit in the whole system. Once they have your house, nothing can stop them." His eyes were desperate. "I saw them installing something near your gas line yesterday. They're done waiting. You need to—" Suddenly, bright lights flooded the loading dock. The black SUV appeared at the entrance, its engine roaring. Mr. Chen shoved me toward a side exit. "Run! Don't let them—" His words were cut off by the screech of tires. I sprinted through the old service corridor, the USB drive clutched in my hand. Behind me, I heard shouting and what sounded like a struggle. I wanted to go back for Mr. Chen, but I knew I couldn't help him if they caught me too. I ran through the abandoned mall, past empty storefronts with dark windows that reflected my fleeing form. The exit on the far side would lead to the woods, behind the property. If I could make it there, a security gate blocked my path. As I scrambled to climb over it, I heard James Cooper's voice echo through the corridor. "It's over. You're only making things worse for yourself." I dropped down on the other side just as flashlight beams swept the hallway. The woods were 30 yards away, across open parking lot. I'd never felt more exposed in my life. Halfway across the lot, I heard Victoria's voice. "Shoot out the lights. Don't let him record anything." Glass shattered behind me as the security lights went dark. In the sudden blackness, I ran straight into something solid. Richard Sterling. His hand clamped around my arm like a vice. "The USB drive," he growled. "Hand it over and maybe we can still work something out." Instead of struggling, I let my body go slack, a self-defense move I'd learned years ago. As he adjusted his grip, I twisted free and drove my elbow back, catching him in the solar plexus. He doubled over, cursing, and I sprinted for the tree. Lane footsteps pounded behind me. A flashlight beam caught me just as I reached the woods. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" followed by a sharp crack that could only be gunfire. Bark exploded from a tree beside my head. I plunged into the darkness of the woods, running blind through undergrowth, branches whipping at my face. The USB drive felt like it was burning in my pocket. Behind me, multiple flashlights swept through the trees, voices calling to each other. as they coordinated their search. My only advantage was knowing these woods. I'd walked through them nearly every day since moving in. There was a steep ravine ahead that led to the creek behind my property. If I could reach it without breaking my neck in the dark, I crashed through the underbrush, half running, half sliding down the ravine. The steep incline was treacherous. In the dark, but fear kept me moving. Behind me, flashlight beams bounced through the trees as my pursuers spread out, trying to cut off my escape routes. "He's heading for the creek." James Cooper's voice echoed through the woods. "Circle around to the bridge." They knew these woods too. Of course they did. They'd been planning this for years. The bridge Cooper mentioned was my planned escape route, a footbridge that crossed the creek near my property. I had to change direction. Instead of following the ravine to the creek, I veered left, climbing the steep embankment. My hands scraped against rocks and roots as I pulled myself up. At the top, I pressed myself flat against a fallen tree, trying to control my breathing. Flashlight beams swept the ravine below. "Spread out!" Victoria's voice carried clearly in. "The night air. He has evidence that could destroy everything. Find him!" I waited until the search moved further down the ravine, then started crawling through the undergrowth. My house was still half a mile away, but I knew a hidden path that followed an old property line. If I could reach it without being spotted, a twig snapped nearby. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. Richard Sterling's massive silhouette passed within feet of my position. In the dim moonlight, I could see he was holding something that looked more serious than a flashlight. "A pistol. Check the motion sensors," he called out. "He has to cross one of the detection zones to reach the residential area." Motion sensors. The pieces clicked together. All those times, James Cooper had been surveying the woods with his equipment. They hadn't just bugged my house. They'd turned the entire area into a surveillance zone. I needed a diversion. Reaching into my pocket, I found my car keys. With trembling fingers, I detached the heavy keyring from the electronic fob. Taking careful aim, I threw the keys as far as I could to my right. The metallic clatter sent my pursuers rushing in that direction. I took advantage of the distraction to move deeper into the woods, away from their search pattern. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my jacket pocket. What secrets had Mr. Chen uncovered that were worth shooting at someone over? After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, I reached the edge of the woods near the Thompsons' backyard. All the houses were dark except for one, mine. Lights blazed from every window. Dark figures moved inside, searching. I couldn't go home. They'd be watching for that. I needed somewhere safe to check what was on the USB drive and contact Rachel. But where? They were probably monitoring my usual haunts, the coffee shop, the library, even my office. A noise behind me made me duck behind a tree. A car was crawling. Down the street, its headlights off, the black SUV. Through the trees, I could see Victoria in the passenger seat talking into a phone. To search every inch. He has to have a backup of the files somewhere in the house. And find out what Chen told him. Use whatever means necessary. My heart raced. Mr. Chen. In the chaos of the chase, I'd almost forgotten about him. What had they done to him? I couldn't leave him to their mercy, but I was in no position to help anyone until I got somewhere safe. That's when I remembered the old groundskeeper's cottage at the nature reserve. It had been abandoned years ago when the county cut the maintenance budget, but I'd noticed it still had power during my morning walks. The perfect hiding place. Getting there meant crossing 2 streets and skirting the edge of the golf course. Every movement had to be carefully planned. They had motion sensors in the woods, which meant they probably had other surveillance equipment I couldn't see. I waited until the SUV turned the corner, then darted across the Thompsons' yard, keeping to the shadows. Their motion-activated security light didn't trigger. They must have disabled it. Another piece of evidence showing how deep this conspiracy went. At the edge of their property, I found something that made my blood run cold. Half hidden in The bushes was a small electronic device with the Stealth Tech logo. A quick scan of the area revealed more. They'd set up a sophisticated surveillance perimeter around the entire neighborhood. No wonder they'd been so confident. They weren't just watching my house, they were monitoring everyone. The HOA wasn't just a cover for their mining operation. It was a control mechanism for the entire community. Those voluntary security system upgrades they'd pushed on everyone last year, probably all stealth tech equipment, turning every home into a monitoring station. I had to get to that cottage and find out what was on the USB drive. Whatever Mr. Chen had discovered, it was bigger than illegal mining. This was about power, control, and something worth killing to keep secret. As if to emphasize that thought, a distant sound echoed through the night, police sirens heading toward the old mall. I had a sickening feeling about what they might find there. Mr. Chen had risked everything to get me this information. I couldn't let his sacrifice be for nothing. The groundskeeper's cottage was exactly as I remembered it. A small stone building, nearly hidden by overgrown vegetation. The padlock on the door was rusted but still functional. I used my pocket knife to work the aging mechanism, thanking my teenage self for learning lockpicking as a hobby. Inside, everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for some relatively recent footprints. Someone had been here within the last few days. I carefully checked every corner, behind every shelf, looking for surveillance equipment. Nothing. This place was truly off their radar. An old desk in the corner still had a working power outlet. I pulled out the laptop I'd grabbed during my escape and plugged it in. The USB drive Mr. Chen had given me contained dozens of folders, meticulously organized by year. As I started going through them, the true scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. The first folder contained geological surveys from 1992. The official public versions showed nothing remarkable about the land under Oakridge Heights. But the real surveys, paid for by Robert Blackwood's company, revealed extensive cave systems rich with rare earth elements, particularly neodymium and dysprosium, crucial components in advanced technology. But it was the next folder that made my hands shake. Building permits, city council minutes, and private correspondence revealed a systematic campaign of bribery and intimidation. The Blackwoods hadn't just created a fake HOA. They'd corrupted local officials, manipulated property records, and even arranged accidents for people who asked too many questions. A document from 2015 caught my eye, a police report about Ellen Chen's murder. The official investigation concluded it was a random burglary gone wrong. But here was an email from Victoria Blackwood to someone named Director. Chen's situation handled. Evidence retrieved. Suggest implementing stricter monitoring protocols for all residents. I started logging everything, creating a detailed timeline. The pattern was chilling. Every few years, someone would get close to discovering the truth. Each time, they would either suddenly sell their house and move away, or suffer a tragic accident. Michael Peterson's lawsuit in 2018 wasn't dropped voluntarily. His teenage daughter had nearly died in a car accident that caused brake failure. The surveillance network was more extensive than I'd imagined. Stealth Tech wasn't just providing equipment, they were a partner in the operation. The security systems installed in every home were feeding data to a central monitoring facility. Every email, every phone call, every movement was being watched. Noise outside made me freeze. Flashlight beams swept past the cottage windows. They were searching the nature reserve. I quickly copied the most important files to my laptop and concealed the USB drive in a crack in the stone wall. If they found me, at least the evidence would be preserved. I pulled up my phone's video recording app and started documenting everything I'd discovered, speaking quietly but clearly. My name is Name. If you're watching this, something has happened to me. What I'm about to show you proves that the Oakridge Heights HOA is actually a criminal enterprise involved in illegal mining, surveillance, and murder. For the next hour, I detailed everything: the mineral deposits, the surveillance network, the pattern of intimidation and violence. I included names, dates, and references to specific documents. As I worked, I could hear the search getting closer. They were being thorough, methodically checking every building and structure in the area. Then my laptop screen flickered. A new email appeared from an unknown address. The subject line made my heart stop. Looking in the wrong place. The email contained a single image, a thermal scan of my house taken just hours ago. Red and yellow colors showed heat signatures in the walls and floors. But what caught my eye was a cold blue area under the foundation. A void space, much larger than any normal basement should be. Another email arrived. Check your garden shed. Back wall, they've been closer than you think. It had to be Mr. Chen. Either he had escaped or he'd set up automated messages in case something happened to him. Either way, he was telling me the most important evidence wasn't in these documents. It was literally in my own backyard. The flashlight beams were getting dangerously close now. I heard James Cooper's voice. Check all the maintenance buildings. He has to be around here somewhere. I needed to get to that shed, but my house was crawling with them. Then I remembered something from the building permits I'd just reviewed. The original plans for my property showed a drainage tunnel connecting the nature reserve to the creek behind my house. If it still existed, it would pass right near my garden shed. I quickly shut down the laptop and hid it behind some old equipment. The USB drive stayed in the wall, a backup in case things went wrong. As I slipped out the back window of the cottage, I could hear them approaching the front door. Whatever was in my garden shed, they were willing to kill to keep it hidden. I just hoped I could reach it before they realized where I was really going. Finding the drainage tunnel entrance took precious minutes of searching in the dark. Decades of overgrowth had almost completely concealed it, but the recent rain had carved a telling path through the vegetation. As I pulled away vines and branches, I found old metal bars blocking the entrance, but two were loose enough to squeeze through. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing me to crouch walk through inches of stagnant water. My phone's flashlight revealed generations of spider webs and what looked like rat nests. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, a metallic odor I couldn't quite place. Halfway through the tunnel, I heard voices echoing from both directions. They'd found the cottage. Laptop still warm. He was just here. Someone was shouting orders about sealing off the area. They'd figure out where I'd gone soon enough. I moved faster, ignoring the burning in my thighs from the awkward position. The tunnel gradually sloped upward, and I started seeing odd marks on the walls, not regular maintenance notations, but some kind of systematic measurements or survey marks. They were recent, still clear against the grime of decades. Then my light caught something that made me stop cold. A modern security camera, carefully disguised to look weathered, was mounted in a shadowy alcove. It was pointed downward at a specific section of the tunnel floor. I aimed my light where it was watching and noticed something odd about the concrete, a slight seam that shouldn't be there, a hidden access point. They weren't just surveying the tunnel, they were actively using it. But for what? The metallic smell was stronger here, almost like my thoughts were interrupted by a distant mechanical sound, followed by voices getting clearer. They weren't just searching the tunnel, they were herding me towards something. I reached the section of tunnel that should lead to my backyard, but instead of the expected exit, I found a heavy metal door set into the wall. It looked newly installed, with a keypad lock that glowed faintly in the dark. Next to it was a familiar logo, Stealth Tech Solutions. The voices were getting closer. I had seconds to decide, try to bypass the keypad or backtrack and find another way. Then I remembered something from the files. Victoria's husband's birth date kept appearing in various documents as a reference number. With trembling fingers, I punched in the date, 05219992. The door clicked open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow corridor lined with modern industrial panels. The contrast with the old drainage tunnel was shocking. This was new construction, clearly part of something much bigger than a simple mining operation. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over everything. The walls were lined with the same kind of monitoring equipment I'd seen James Cooper carrying, but much larger versions. Screens showed thermal imaging of the entire neighborhood with heat signatures visible through walls and floors. They weren't just watching us. They were tracking every movement in every house. As I moved deeper into the corridor, I started seeing other doors, each marked with cryptic numbers and letters. Through small windows, I caught glimpses of sophisticated equipment, computer banks, and what looked like laboratory setups. This went way beyond mining for rare earth elements. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, and I recognized it. Ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Something in here was using massive amounts of electricity. Suddenly, all the emergency lights turned green. A computerized voice echoed through the corridor. Security breach detected. Containment protocols initiated. Metal shutters began descending from the ceiling. I sprinted forward, ducking under the descending shutters. Through the last window before the corridor turned, I saw something that defied explanation. A massive chamber bathed in blue light, filled with equipment that looked more advanced than anything I'd ever seen. In the center was some kind of reactor or energy collection device, arcs of electricity dancing between suspended spheres. The last shutter was almost closed. I had to choose, roll under it into unknown danger or be trapped in the corridor. The voices from the tunnel were right behind me now. I dropped and rolled, barely making it under the shutter before it sealed with a resonating clang. As I got to my feet in the new section, I found myself face to face with a wall of monitors showing live feeds from every house in Oakridge Heights. But it was what they were measuring that made my blood run cold. Not just movement and heat, signatures, but detailed biometric data from every resident. Heart rates, sleep patterns, stress levels, DNA profiles. They weren't just monitoring the neighborhood. They were conducting some kind of massive human experiment. And according to the flashing red warning on the main screen, Subject 23, me, was now classified as compromised. Before I could process what I was seeing, a new sound cut through the humming of equipment, footsteps on metal grating coming from above. I looked up to see catwalks crisscrossing the ceiling and multiple figures converging on my position. Well, Victoria's voice echoed from somewhere above. I suppose now you understand why we can't simply let you walk away. I backed away from the monitors, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. The HOA wasn't just mining rare earth elements. They were using them to build advanced technology, turning the entire neighborhood into an elaborate testing ground. Every resident was an unwitting test subject in whatever experiment they were running. Victoria emerged from the shadows above, looking more composed than ever in her expensive suit. "Fascinating, isn't it?" she said, gesturing at the screens. 30 years of careful planning, gathering data on how human beings respond to subtle environmental changes. The mineral deposits were just the beginning. What we learned from them allowed us to develop something far more valuable. "You're experimenting on people without their consent," I said, still backing away. "Children, elderly, entire families." "We're advancing human knowledge," she corrected, descending a metal staircase. "Everything from sleep patterns to stress responses, cognitive function to immune system efficiency. The data we've gathered here has helped develop technologies that will change the world." James Cooper and Richard Sterling emerged from side corridors, cutting off my escape routes. The blue light from the reactor cast strange shadows across their faces, making them look almost inhuman. "The HOA was the perfect cover," Victoria continued. "Who questions an overzealous homeowners association? When we need to adjust testing, parameters, we simply issue new regulations. When we need more detailed data on a subject, we create violations that require inspections. The surveillance network monitors everything: diet, exercise, social interactions, even emotional responses. She reached the floor level, her heels clicking on the metal grating. Your house sits at a crucial junction point in our grid. The mineral deposits beneath it have unique properties we need for our next phase of testing. We tried to do this the easy way, but you forced our hand. My back hit a wall. On the screens behind Victoria, I could see my own vital signs being monitored in real time. Heart rate elevated, adrenaline spiking. They'd been studying my every reaction, even now. "What happened to Mr. Chen?" I demanded. "A regrettable situation," Victoria sighed. "He was one of our original test subjects, you know. His resistance to our cognitive influence tests was remarkable, but in the end, even he couldn't resist forever, just like his wife." A new alarm suddenly blared through the facility. One of the technicians at a monitoring station called out, "Ma'am, we've got a problem. The power grid is destabilizing. Subject 23's biometrics are causing interference with the quantum field." Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly. She turned to the monitors, her eyes widening at whatever she saw in the data streams. "Impossible. The probability of a natural resonance is—" The reactor's blue glow began pulsing erratically. Arcs of energy crackled between the spheres with increasing intensity. Warning messages flashed across multiple screens. "Shut it down," Victoria ordered. "Initiate emergency protocols." But something was happening that they hadn't anticipated. The energy pulses seemed to be synchronizing with my heartbeat, visible on the biometric display. Every surge sent waves of tingling sensation through my body. James Cooper grabbed my arm. "We need to get him out of here. His presence is destabilizing the whole system." Victoria's voice turned desperate. "No, we need him contained. Prep the conditioning chamber. If we can't control him, we'll have to—" She never finished the sentence. A massive power surge ripped through the facility, shattering screens and overloading equipment. In the chaos, I broke free from Cooper's grip and ran for the emergency exit I'd spotted earlier. "Stop him!" Victoria screamed. "If he exposes this, everything we've built will be destroyed." I slammed through the exit door into another corridor, this one sloping upward. Behind me, I could hear the reactor's hum, reaching dangerous levels. More alarms joined the cacophony: evacuation warnings, system failures, structural alerts. The corridor led to what looked like a maintenance room. There, half hidden behind storage shelves, I found what I was looking for: my garden shed. They'd built their facility around it, using it as one of their access points. The original wall was still there, now reinforced with steel panels. As I searched frantically for a way through, I heard Victoria's voice over the facility's speaker system. "You have no idea what you're doing. The energy field is unstable. If you leave now—" Another surge interrupted her, stronger than before. Equipment exploded in showers of sparks. The metal walls groaned under some invisible pressure. I finally found the hidden panel Mr. Chen had mentioned, revealing a narrow space behind the shed wall. There, wrapped in protective covering, was a small device I recognized from the technical documents. A quantum field generator, the prototype for whatever massive version they were running in that reactor. This was what Mr. Chen had died trying to expose. Not just the illegal mining or the human experimentation, but proof of technology that shouldn't exist yet. As I reached for it, a final warning blared through the facility. "Critical failure imminent. Quantum containment breach in 3 minutes. All personnel evacuate immediately." I grabbed the quantum field generator and the documentation beside it, stuffing everything into my jacket. The facility's warning system continued its countdown, but something else caught my attention. A laptop connected to what looked like a backup server. On its screen, data was being systematically deleted. wiping away evidence of their operations. Acting on instinct, I yanked out the laptop's power cord and network cable, hoping it would preserve whatever files were still intact. As I disconnected, I noticed a familiar name in one of the folders, Project Chen. With trembling hands, I downloaded as much as I could to a spare USB drive I found in the desk drawer. The room's emergency lights switched to red, and a computerized voice announced, "Quantum containment failing. 2 minutes until catastrophic breach. Emergency protocols engaged." I could hear chaos erupting throughout the facility, running footsteps, shouting voices, the sound of equipment being hastily powered down. Through the wall, Victoria was barking orders. "Secure all terminals. Initiate data purge. No evidence can remain." The garden shed's back wall had a hidden release mechanism, exactly where Mr. Chen's email had indicated. As I triggered it, I heard James Cooper's voice getting closer. "He has to be in the maintenance sector. Check every room!" The wall panel slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the actual interior of my garden shed. I squeezed through just as flashlight beams swept the maintenance room. The panel sealed behind me with a soft click, leaving me in darkness broken only by moonlight through the shed's dusty windows. But I wasn't safe yet. Through the shed's slats, I could see figures emerging from hidden access points throughout the neighborhood. The evacuation was in full swing, and they'd be looking for me. I needed to get this evidence to someone who could help, but who could I trust? My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Where are you? Police at your house. They're saying something about a gas leak evacuation." A cover story. They were going to use the evacuation to clean up any evidence of their operation. I texted back, "Rachel, listen carefully. Get FBI involved now, not local police. Sending video evidence, major conspiracy, people in danger." I attached the video I'd recorded in the cottage and started forwarding photos of the documents. The quantum field generator hummed softly in my jacket, reminding me that I had tangible proof of something beyond normal criminal activity. Another warning blared from underground, muffled but still audible. 1 minute until containment failure. All personnel clear the affected radius. I had to make a choice, try to reach my car and escape, or find somewhere to hide until help arrived. The decision was made for me when I saw the black SUV parked behind my vehicle, 2 men standing guard. Instead, I moved carefully through the shadows of my backyard, using the landscaping as cover. The evacuation had created chaos in the neighborhood. Emergency vehicles were arriving, their lights painting everything in red and blue. Residents were being hurriedly escorted from their homes by people in hazmat suits, actual first responders, mixed with HOA operatives in disguise. My phone buzzed again. "Rachel, FBI contact made. They're asking about something called Project Quantum Echo. Mean anything to you?" Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Helicopters approaching. But these weren't news or medical helicopters. Their dark shapes and lack of marking suggested military or federal agencies. Victoria's voice carried across the yard. "Find him. He has the prototype. Without it, we can't prove." The rest was drowned out by a deep, resonating hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The quantum field generator in my jacket grew warm, vibrating in sync with the sound. All the electronics in the area started going haywire, car alarms, phones, even the emergency lights on the vehicles. 30 seconds to containment failure. The warning system announced, now clearly audible through multiple access points. Quantum field collapse imminent. Clear the area immediately. I reached the edge of my property, planning to make a break for the main road, when a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around ready to fight, but found myself face to face with Mr. Chen. He was bruised, but very much alive. "And there's no time," he said urgently. "The quantum field is destabilizing. When it collapses, it'll wipe every computer and electronic device in a half-mile radius. We need to shield the evidence." He pulled me toward his house, moving with surprising speed for his age. "I have a Faraday cage in my basement. It's our only chance to preserve the proof. After that, he looked grim. After that, we'll have about 30 seconds to clear the blast radius before everything goes dark. Mr. Chen's basement looked nothing like I expected. Behind a false wall of storage shelves, he had constructed what looked like a mini research facility. The walls were lined with lead and copper mesh, a professional-grade Faraday cage. Multiple screens displayed data feeds similar to what I'd seen in the underground facility, but these were focused on tracking the quantum field fluctuations. I've been monitoring them for years, Mr. Chen explained, as he quickly connected my laptop to a secure storage system. After they killed Ellen, I dedicated my life to exposing them, but I had to be careful. Make them think I was just another compliant resident. The quantum field generator was still humming in my jacket, its vibrations growing stronger. Mr. Chen carefully placed it in a specially shielded container. This prototype was never meant to leave the facility. They didn't account for the possibility that it would resonate with human bioelectrical fields. That's why you were able to destabilize their containment system. A deep tremor ran through the ground. Above us, car alarms were going off all over the neighborhood. Through the small basement window, I could see emergency lights casting chaotic shadows as people evacuated. "How long have you known about all this?" I asked, watching him efficiently copy and encrypt the data. "Since the beginning. I was part of the original research team in the 90s, before I realized what Victoria and her husband really planned to do with the technology. The quantum resonance field was supposed to be used for clean energy production. Instead, they turned it into a massive human experimentation project." He pulled up a series of documents on his main screen. These are the original research papers, showing how they modified the technology to influence human behavior. The rare earth elements weren't just for building equipment. They found a way to use them to create a quantum field that could subtly affect brainwave patterns. The whole neighborhood is essentially a giant test lab for mind control technology. The federal helicopters were getting closer. Through Mr. Chen's monitoring system, I could see agents establishing a perimeter around the neighborhood. But Victoria's people were still searching for us, their flashlight beams visible through the window. 10 seconds to quantum containment failure, the warning system announced, its sound carrying even through the Faraday cage. Mr. Chen worked faster. "The evidence is copying to secure servers outside the blast radius. When the field collapses, it'll trigger a dead man switch I installed years ago. Every secret document, every test result, every illegal experiment. It'll all be sent to multiple federal agencies and news organizations." 5 seconds. He handed me a small device that looked like a key fob. "Emergency beacon. When everything goes dark, the FBI will track this to find us. Whatever happens, don't let Victoria's people get to you first. They'll do anything to contain the situation. 3, 2, 1. The world seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Then every electronic device outside the Faraday cage went dead simultaneously. The power grid failed, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. Through the window, I saw a ripple of energy pulse outward from the center of the facility, like a visible shockwave of distorted air. In the protected basement, Mr. Chen's equipment showed what was really happening. The quantum field was collapsing, releasing years of accumulated energy in one massive burst. The underground facility's reactor was going into cascade failure. "We need to move, now." Mr. Chen grabbed a bag of what looked like additional evidence and headed for the basement's concealed exit. The structural supports under the neighborhood weren't designed to handle this level of quantum energy discharge. The whole grid of tunnels could collapse. As if to emphasize his point, another tremor shook the house, stronger than before. Through the chaos of evacuation outside, I heard Victoria's voice closer than comfortable. "They have to be nearby. Find them before the feds lock down the area." We emerged from Mr. Chen's hidden exit into his garden shed, just as another energy pulse rippled through the neighborhood. This one was strong enough to shatter windows. Car electronics that had been fried by the first pulse sparked and smoked. The very air felt charged with static electricity. In the distance, federal agents were moving in, their advanced equipment presumably shielded against the quantum disruption. But between us and them were Victoria's people, systematically searching every property, growing more desperate by the minute. Mr. Chen checked his shielded tablet. The data transfer is complete. In about 30 seconds, every major news outlet and federal agency will know exactly what's been happening in Oakridge Heights. Victoria's entire operation is about to be exposed. Through the shed slats, I saw James Cooper approaching Mr. Chen's house, weapon drawn. We had to move, but the open space between properties was now eerily lit by the pulses of quantum energy, still emanating from underground. There was no way to cross unseen. Mr. Chen seemed to read my thoughts. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said quietly. "The prototype you're carrying, it's not just for generating quantum fields. In the right conditions, it can also disrupt them. But using it might draw every bit of quantum energy in the area straight to us. It could give us a chance to escape, or—" He left the sentence unfinished as another tremor rocked the ground. The decision was made for us when the shed door burst open. James Cooper stood there, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Don't move!" he shouted, but his voice trembled. The quantum energy pulses were getting stronger, making the air itself seem to vibrate. Mr. Chen moved with surprising speed, knocking over his garden tools to create a distraction. In the confusion, I pulled out the prototype generator. It felt warm, almost alive in my hands, its hum synchronizing with the waves of energy rolling through the neighborhood. "No!" Cooper lunged forward, but he was too late. I pressed the activation sequence Mr. Chen had shown me on his tablet. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Every quantum pulse in the area suddenly curved toward us, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. The air crackled with visible energy. Cooper's flashlight exploded in his hands, along with every other electronic device nearby. He staggered back, momentarily blinded. "Run!" Mr. Chen pushed me toward the back of his property. Behind us, I heard Victoria screaming orders. "Don't let them reach the federal agents. Everything we've worked for depends on containing this." We sprinted through yards and gardens, now transformed into an otherworldly landscape by the quantum energy. Each pulse lit up the night in waves of blue-white light. Trees swayed in electromagnetic winds. The ground trembled continuously as the underground facility's systems continued to fail. Federal agents were moving in from all directions, their specialized equipment glowing with protective fields. But Victoria's security team was closing in too, caught in a desperate race to reach us first. "Keep moving," Mr. Chen gasped. "The prototype is drawing power from their containment breach. It's the only thing preventing a complete cascade failure." He was right. Each wave of energy the prototype absorbed seemed to reduce the violent pulses emanating from underground. But it was also making the device dangerously hot. How long could it contain this much quantum energy? We reached the Thompsons' yard, making a break for the police barricade visible at the end of the street. That's when Victoria appeared, blocking our path. She held what looked like an advanced energy weapon, its barrel crackling with the same blue light as the prototype. 30 years of work," she snarled. 3 decades of pushing the boundaries of human potential. I won't let you destroy everything we've built." She aimed the weapon at Mr. Chen. "You should have stayed quiet, old man, just like your wife." The mention of his wife sparked something in Mr. Chen. Without warning, he tackled Victoria, knocking her weapon aside. "Go," he shouted at me. "Get the prototype to the feds. I've got nothing left to lose." I hesitated for a split second, then ran. Behind me I heard sounds of struggle, followed by Victoria's enraged scream. The prototype was growing unbearably hot in my hands, its hum reaching a pitch that made my teeth vibrate. Richard Sterling appeared from behind a parked car, trying to grab me. The prototype's energy field sent him flying backward, his phone and watch sparking uselessly. Every piece of technology that wasn't specially shielded was being fried by the quantum interference. The federal agents were shouting through megaphones, ordering everyone to clear the area. Their protective gear sparked and crackled as they pushed forward against the waves of quantum energy. I could see Rachel standing with them, pointing in my direction. Suddenly, a massive tremor rocked the neighborhood. The ground near the center of the underground facility began to sink, creating a growing depression that started swallowing Victoria's perfect landscaping. The quantum containment was failing completely. "It's going critical," I heard Mr. Chen shout. He had Victoria pinned down, but more of her security team was approaching. "The prototype can't contain much more energy." He was right. The device was now painfully hot, its housing starting to warp. Each new energy pulse it absorbed made it more unstable. If it failed here in the open, the released quantum energy could level half the neighborhood. The FBI's quantum containment team was setting up some kind of emergency equipment, but they were still too far away. Victoria's people were closing in from both sides. The ground was continuing to sink, threatening to take several houses with it. In that moment of crisis, I remembered something from the technical documents. The prototype had an emergency release mechanism. If triggered near the facility's main reactor, it could theoretically force a controlled shutdown of the quantum field. But that meant going back into the underground facility that was literally falling apart, back toward the wildly unstable reactor that was pumping out waves of quantum energy, back through Victoria's closing net of desperate armed operatives. The prototype's housing cracked slightly, leaking brilliant blue light. Small objects around me began floating, caught in the quantum field's distortion of local gravity. I had seconds to decide: try to reach the federal containment team, or risk everything on a desperate plan to shut down the reactor. Mr. Chen's voice carried across the chaos. "The maintenance shaft. It's still stable. You can reach the reactor core." Another violent tremor rocked the neighborhood. The growing sinkhole creaked ominously as support structures began to fail. Victoria broke free from Mr. Chen, scrambling for her dropped weapon. The FBI team's equipment was sparking, overwhelmed by the intensity of the quantum field. Time was up. I had to make a choice. I made my choice. With the prototype burning in my hands, I sprinted back toward the maintenance shaft. Behind me, I heard Victoria screaming orders and the FBI team shouting warnings, but there was no turning back now. The entire neighborhood's safety depended on shutting down that reactor. The maintenance shaft entrance was where we'd left it, the emergency lighting still functioning thanks to shielded power systems. As I climbed down, I could hear the facility groaning under the stress of quantum energy displacement. Support beams creaked ominously, and hairline cracks were spreading across the reinforced walls. The prototype's energy field was actually helping me navigate, its blue glow intensifying as I got closer to the reactor core. The main corridors were in chaos, emergency systems blaring, damaged equipment sparking, and the air itself seeming to shimmer with quantum distortions. "Stop right there!" James Cooper's voice echoed through the corridor. He emerged from a side passage, looking disheveled but determined. "You have no idea what you're about to destroy. This technology could revolutionize human consciousness itself." "It's built on lies and murder," I shot back, the prototype's energy field keeping him at a distance. How many people did Victoria have killed to keep this secret? How many lives destroyed? "You think too small," he said, edging closer despite the field's effects. "The quantum resonance can reshape human behavior. Eliminate conflict, end crime, create perfect social harmony. The test subjects here proved it works. Test subjects? You mean innocent families, people with children. The prototype pulsed stronger as my anger rose. You turned an entire neighborhood into lab rats. A new tremor shook the facility, more violent than before. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind Cooper, cutting off his retreat. The quantum field was becoming dangerously unstable. The reactor core is going critical, he said, his composure cracking. If you try to interface that prototype with it, you could trigger a quantum cascade. It'll destroy everything within a mile. Unless I can force a controlled shutdown, I countered, remembering Mr. Chen's technical documents. The prototype can absorb enough energy to initiate an emergency containment protocol. Cooper's eyes widened. That's suicide. The energy feedback would... He never finished the sentence. A massive support beam crashed down between us, forcing him to jump back. The path to the reactor core was clear. The core chamber was a scene from a sci-fi nightmare. The massive reactor sphere pulsed with barely contained energy, arcs of quantum discharge dancing between containment pylons. The control systems were in emergency lockdown, screens displaying critical warnings in angry red text. I fought my way to the main control panel, the prototype growing almost too hot to hold. According to Mr. Chen's instructions, I needed to link it to the reactor's emergency systems and trigger a specific feedback loop. "Don't!" Victoria's voice rang out. She stood on the observation platform above, her quantum weapon aimed directly at me. "That prototype is the culmination of my husband's life work, the key to controlling human evolution itself." "Your husband?" I laughed bitterly, working to connect the prototype. "You mean the man who mysteriously disappeared in 2018? Another accident to protect your secrets?" Her face contorted with rage. "Robert was weak. He wanted to shut everything down, expose our research. I couldn't let him destroy decades of progress." The prototype was now connected, its energy field synchronizing with the reactor's quantum matrix. Warning systems screamed as power levels spiked dangerously. "The containment field is collapsing," Cooper shouted from the doorway. "We need to evacuate now." Victoria raised her weapon. "Step away from the controls. I won't let you." Her words were drowned out by a deafening hum as the prototype fully engaged with the reactor. The quantum energy field became visible, a swirling vortex of blue-white light centered on the prototype. Emergency shutters began slamming down as the facility's final containment protocols activated. Victoria fired her weapon, but the energy beam curved away, drawn into the quantum vortex. The prototype was now acting as a quantum sink, drawing in all the unstable energy. The pain from holding the device was excruciating, like grabbing a live wire. But I could see the reactor's power levels starting to drop. The emergency shutdown was working, at a cost. The prototype's housing was disintegrating, exposing raw quantum energy. "It's working!" Mr. Chen's voice crackled through the facility's failing comm system. "The FBI's sensors show the quantum field is stabilizing. Hold on just a few more seconds." Victoria screamed in frustration and did something completely unexpected. She jumped down to my level and charged straight at me, heedless of the quantum energy field. "If this facility burns," she snarled, "you're burning with it." The quantum vortex between us was the only thing that saved my life. When Victoria charged, the energy field caught her like a physical wall, holding her suspended in its crackling matrix. Her face contorted in a silent scream as decades of her own quantum experiments turned against her. The prototype was failing catastrophically now, its casing completely gone. Raw quantum energy poured through my hands, burning like liquid fire. But the reactor's power levels were dropping rapidly. The emergency shutdown was seconds away from completion. "The quantum field is collapsing," Cooper shouted from the doorway. "The whole facility is going to cave in." He was right. The ceiling was cracking apart, support beams twisting under impossible forces. The quantum vortex had Victoria trapped, but it was also preventing me from reaching the exit. The prototype had become a quantum anchor, and I was bound to it until the shutdown sequence finished. Through the facility's failing communications, I heard Mr. Chen's voice. The FBI quantum containment team is detecting a massive energy spike. Get out now! But I couldn't let go. The prototype was the only thing preventing a catastrophic release of quantum energy. If I dropped it now, the backlash would level half the neighborhood. Victoria was still caught in the quantum field, her body distorting as if seen through rippling water. "You don't understand," she gasped, her voice warped by the energy waves. "The quantum resonance, it changes people, makes them better. We were so close." The reactor's emergency systems finally engaged fully. Containment fields activated in sequence, drawing in the loose quantum energy. The prototype grew impossibly hot, then suddenly ice cold. The vortex began to collapse. Victoria dropped to the floor, unconscious but alive. The prototype's remains crumbled to ash in my burned hands. Above us, the facility's structure was giving way completely. "Move!" Cooper grabbed my arm, actually helping me toward the exit. Whatever his loyalty to Victoria, self-preservation had won out. We ran through collapsing corridors as decades of secret infrastructure fell apart around us. We emerged from the maintenance shaft into chaos. The FBI quantum containment team had established a perimeter, their specialized equipment working to stabilize the failing underground structure. Victoria's security team was being arrested, their weapons and technology confiscated. Mr. Chen was with the federal agents, directing them to key access points where evidence needed to be secured. When he saw me, he broke into a relieved smile. "The quantum field is contained," he said. "It's over." The next few hours passed in a blur. Hazmat teams searched the underground facility while it was still partially stable. They recovered hard drives, documents, and equipment that proved the full scope of Victoria's operation. The FBI's forensics team found something else too. Human remains, buried behind a false wall. Robert Blackwood had never left Oakridge Heights. I was taken to a secure medical facility specializing in quantum energy exposure. The burns on my hands would heal, they said, but they were more concerned about the effects of prolonged contact with an unstable quantum field. They'd need to monitor me for months. Rachel arrived as they were finishing my treatment. "You're not going to believe this," she said, showing me her tablet. "The evidence is spreading across every major news network. Victoria Blackwood's entire operation is exposed." The story was staggering. For 30 years, the fake HOA had been a front for illegal quantum experiments on unwitting human subjects. The rare earth minerals weren't just for technology. They were crucial components in a massive quantum field generator designed to influence human consciousness. "They've found similar operations in 3 other states," Rachel continued. "Shell, companies, fake homeowners associations, all connected to Victoria's quantum research. The FBI is calling it the largest case of illegal human experimentation in U.S. history." Mr. Chen visited me in the hospital the next day. He looked tired but satisfied. "The quantum effects are still dissipating," he said, showing me readings on his shielded tablet. "It'll take months for the energy to completely disperse, but the neighborhood is safe now." Victoria's dream of controlling human consciousness through quantum manipulation died in that facility. "What happens to everyone's homes?" I asked. The underground structure's collapse had created significant damage. "The federal government is establishing a victim compensation fund. Everyone affected will be taken care of." He smiled sadly. "Ellen would have wanted that. She always said the truth would come out eventually." The next week, as I was being released, I watched Victoria's arraignment on the news. She sat emotionless as the charges were read. Multiple counts of murder, illegal human experimentation, quantum energy violations, and dozens of other federal crimes. The technology she'd spent her life developing would now be studied openly, ethically, under strict government oversight, but something still bothered me. During my final examination, the doctors had noticed unusual readings in my neural scans. The quantum exposure had changed something in my brain chemistry. They couldn't tell if it was temporary or permanent, harmful or beneficial. As I left the hospital, I couldn't help but wonder, had Victoria's experiments actually succeeded in ways she never anticipated? The federal courthouse was packed for the first day of Victoria Blackwood's trial. 6 months had passed since the quantum facility's collapse, but the revelations kept coming. As the lead witness for the prosecution, I sat in the front row, watching as Victoria was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and specialized quantum dampening restraints, a precaution against any lingering effects from her experiments. The prosecution's opening statement laid out a conspiracy that went beyond anything we'd initially discovered. For 3 decades, the federal prosecutor began, the defendant used a fake homeowners association to conduct illegal experiments on American citizens. But this wasn't just about scientific research. This was about power, control, and a deliberate attempt to develop technology that could manipulate human consciousness on a massive scale. Evidence recovered from the facility's computers revealed the true scope of Victoria's operation. The quantum field generator wasn't just affecting Oakridge Heights. It was a prototype for a larger system meant to cover entire cities. The rare earth minerals under my property were crucial because they produced a unique quantum resonance frequency that enhanced the field's effectiveness on human neural patterns. James Cooper had turned state's witness in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony was damning. Mrs. Blackwood saw the HOA as the perfect cover, he told the court. Who questions an overzealous homeowners association? When we needed test subjects to experience specific emotional states, we'd issue violations, create artificial conflicts. The quantum field would amplify their responses, and we'd measure everything. Security footage from the facility showed years of secret observations. Every home had been monitored, every resident's biological responses recorded and analyzed. They had data on sleep patterns, stress responses, emotional states, even children's developmental changes under quantum influence. The most shocking testimony came from a former stealth tech scientist. She revealed that Robert Blackwood had discovered their quantum field was causing unexpected mutations in some subjects' neural pathways. When he threatened to expose everything, Victoria had him killed and buried in the facility, then used his death to accelerate the program. The quantum resonance was creating lasting changes in brain chemistry, the scientist explained. Some subjects showed enhanced cognitive abilities, improved memory, even limited forms of technopathic sensitivity, the ability to interact with electronic devices through thought alone. Mrs. Blackwood believed she was forcing the next step in human evolution. During a break in the proceedings, Rachel showed me classified documents that had been cleared for the trial. The FBI had uncovered similar operations in development across the country. Shell companies purchasing specific properties, fake HOAs being established, geological surveys searching for the same rare earth mineral deposits found under Oakridge Heights. They're calling it Project Awakening, Rachel said quietly. Victoria wasn't just the head of one facility, she was running a nationwide program to test and implement quantum consciousness manipulation. The HOA structure provided perfect cover because it already had built-in mechanisms for controlling people's behavior. When Victoria finally took the stand in her own defense, her testimony was chilling. She showed no remorse, no recognition of the lives she'd destroyed. Instead, she spoke of her work with an almost religious fervor. We stand at the threshold of human potential, she declared. The quantum field doesn't just influence consciousness, it elevates it. Every test subject who died was a necessary sacrifice for the greater evolution of our species. In time, people will understand that we weren't conducting experiments. We were creating the future. The prosecution countered with their strongest evidence yet: the recovered remains of Robert Blackwood and 3 other disappeared residents who had gotten too close to the truth. Digital forensics had recovered Victoria's own logs detailing their eliminations, cold and clinical as scientific observations. Mr. Chen's testimony about his wife's murder brought many in the courtroom to tears. He described how Ellen had discovered financial records linking Victoria to defense contractors, interested in quantum consciousness control. Before she could expose the truth, she was killed in a staged home invasion. Throughout the trial, I kept feeling strange sensations. Moments when electronic devices around me would malfunction, or when I could somehow sense the quantum dampening field containing Victoria. The doctors monitoring my recovery confirmed what I'd suspected. The prototype's energy had changed something in my neural structure. I wasn't the only one. Other residents were reporting similar experiences, leading to a new federal investigation into the long-term effects of quantum field exposure. As the trial went on, more former residents came forward with stories of harassment, surveillance, and unexplained phenomena. Some described moments of inexplicable shared consciousness with neighbors or dreams that seemed to predict facility operations. The quantum field hadn't just been monitoring us. It had been actively reshaping our minds in ways that even Victoria hadn't fully understood. The most disturbing evidence came from decoded research files showing that children born in Oakridge Heights showed statistically significant differences in brain development. Victoria had been creating a generation of humans with enhanced quantum sensitivity, using an entire community as unwitting test subjects in her evolution experiment. The jury took less than 6 hours to reach their verdict. When we returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Victoria sat eerily calm, still wearing her quantum-dampening restraints, as the forewoman stood to deliver the judgment. On the charge of first-degree murder of Robert Blackwood, we find the defendant guilty. One by one, the verdicts came in. Guilty of Ellen Chen's murder, guilty of illegal human experimentation, guilty of quantum energy violations, guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and dozens of other federal crimes. By the time the forewoman finished reading, Victoria was facing multiple life sentences, but the judge had one more surprise. Due to the unprecedented nature of these crimes, he announced, and the continuing threat posed by the defendant's knowledge of quantum consciousness manipulation, I am ordering that Mrs. Blackwood be held in a specialized facility with permanent quantum dampening fields. She will never again be allowed to access or influence quantum energy in any form. For the first time, Victoria's composure cracked. "You can't contain this," she shouted as federal marshals led her away. "The quantum evolution has already begun. Look at them. They're already changing." She was staring directly at me and several other former residents in the courtroom. We all knew what she meant. The strange abilities we'd developed hadn't faded with time. If anything, they were getting stronger. The FBI had established a special medical monitoring program for affected residents. During my latest examination, they documented my growing sensitivity to electronic fields and ability to interact with certain devices through thought alone. Others showed different manifestations: enhanced intuition, shared dreams, even limited forms of technopathic communication. The quantum field exposure has fundamentally altered their neural architecture, the lead researcher explained during a closed Senate hearing. We're seeing the emergence of capabilities that we previously considered theoretical. The human brain's quantum potential that Victoria pursued, it's real. She just went about it in the most unethical way possible. The sentencing included massive financial penalties. Victoria's entire empire was seized, with assets liquidated to create a compensation fund for the victims. Stealth tech was dismantled, its legitimate technology transferred to ethical research programs under strict federal oversight. James Cooper received 20 years for his role in the conspiracy, though his cooperation helped identify other quantum research sites across the country. Richard Sterling took a plea deal in exchange for revealing the locations of 2 other victims' remains. The full death toll of Victoria's experiments was still being uncovered. But the biggest impact came from the class action lawsuit filed on behalf of all Oakridge Heights residents. The evidence showed that every single person in the neighborhood had been subjected to illegal quantum experimentation, their basic human rights violated for years. The damages can never truly be calculated, our lawyer argued in court. How do you compensate people for having their minds and bodies altered without consent? For having their children born into an invisible experiment? For living every day under surveillance and manipulation? The settlement was unprecedented. Over $500 million, plus ongoing medical care for all affected residents and their descendants. The federal government established a special oversight committee to monitor the long-term effects of quantum field exposure, particularly in the children born in Oakridge Heights. Mr. Chen used his share of the settlement to establish a research foundation in Ellen's name, dedicated to ethical quantum science. "We can't undo what Victoria did to us," he said at the foundation's opening, "but we can ensure that future quantum research serves humanity rather than trying to control it." The neighborhood itself was declared a federal research site. The underground facility was permanently sealed, but the lingering quantum energy fields required ongoing monitoring. Most residents chose to relocate, accepting government assistance to start fresh elsewhere. A few, like Mr. Chen, stayed to help study the long-term effects. I struggled with the decision to stay or go. The doctors monitoring my condition warned that my quantum sensitivity would likely continue to develop. Every day brought new manifestations, strange dreams, technological interactions I couldn't fully control, moments of inexplicable connection with others who'd been exposed. "You're proof that human consciousness can evolve," one researcher told me, "but you're evolving through choice and understanding, not through forced manipulation." That's what Victoria never grasped. True evolution can't be controlled or coerced. The key media coverage was intense. Every major network wanted interviews with the residents who'd brought down Victoria's quantum empire. Books and documentaries were already in production. Hollywood studios were bidding for rights to the story, but for those of us who lived through it, who still carried the quantum changes in our minds and bodies, the story was far from over. Victoria was right about one thing. Something had awakened in us. The question now was, what would we choose to do with these unasked-for abilities? 1 year after Victoria's sentencing, I made my decision. Instead of running from what happened, I chose to face it head-on. With part of my settlement money, I established a consulting firm specializing in HOA fraud investigation and property rights protection. The quantum changes I'd experienced gave me a unique edge. I could literally sense when technology was being misused for surveillance. My first major case came from a community in Arizona with suspiciously similar patterns to Oakridge Heights. The local HOA had been pushing for mandatory smart home upgrades, and residents reported strange emotional effects. Using my enhanced abilities and the lessons learned from Victoria's operation, I uncovered another quantum research group attempting to replicate her work. "You're becoming quite the thorn in their side," Rachel told me after the Arizona bust led to multiple arrests. She'd left her law firm to join my company as legal counsel. 3 more quantum research sites shut down in the past month alone, thanks to your investigations. The work was challenging but rewarding. Each case helped identify more victims of illegal quantum experimentation and brought us closer to understanding the full scope of Victoria's network. The FBI's Quantum Task Force became one of our closest allies, often calling us in to consult on cases involving suspected HOA-related quantum activities. Mr. Chen's research foundation partnered with us, providing scientific expertise and monitoring equipment. The combination of his technical knowledge and my quantum sensitivity made us particularly effective at detecting hidden quantum field generators. We even developed new protocols for safely dismantling these devices without risking consciousness alteration in the surrounding population. But it wasn't all work. The quantum changes had personal implications that required constant adaptation. I discovered I could interface with computers directly, accessing data through thought alone. The doctors studying my condition were fascinated by how my neural pathways had reorganized to accommodate these new abilities. "Your brain has essentially developed a quantum coprocessor," one researcher explained, showing me my latest scans. "It's like you've got a biological quantum computer interacting with your normal consciousness." The possibilities for advancement in human-computer interaction are extraordinary. Other Oakridge Heights survivors were experiencing similar evolutions. We formed a support group, meeting regularly to share experiences and help each other cope with our new capabilities. Some had developed remarkable abilities. One former neighbor could predict power grid fluctuations before they happened, while another could see quantum energy fields with her naked eyes. The children of Oakridge Heights showed the most dramatic changes. Those born during the quantum field exposure had natural abilities that made them prodigies in technology and sciences. We worked with their parents to establish a special educational program that could nurture these gifts while protecting them from exploitation. My own home in Oakridge Heights had been destroyed in the facility collapse, but I chose to rebuild on the same spot. The lingering quantum energy in the area resonated with my enhanced sensitivity, and something about the place still felt like home. The new house incorporated specialized shielding technology developed by Mr. Chen, allowing me to control my quantum interactions rather than being overwhelmed by them. The media continued to follow our story, particularly as more quantum research sites were exposed. I appeared on several major news programs, not to sensationalize what happened, but to warn others about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of community vigilance. "The thing about HOAs," I explained in one interview, "is that they're based on the idea of community standards and shared governance. Victoria perverted that concept, using it as cover for her experiments. But real communities protect their members. They don't exploit them." Victoria herself remained in quantum isolation, her abilities permanently dampened. The quarterly reports from her detention facility described her as unchanged in her convictions. She still believed she was advancing human evolution, unable to see how her actions had violated basic human rights. The most satisfying part of my new work was helping other communities regain their autonomy. We didn't just expose illegal quantum operations. We helped neighborhoods establish legitimate, transparent HOAs that actually served their residents. Every successful case felt like a small victory over Victoria's legacy of control and manipulation. "You've turned a nightmare into something positive," Mr. Chen told me during one of our regular strategy sessions. Ellen would have appreciated that. She always said the best revenge against evil is to create something good in its place. As my firm's reputation grew, we started receiving requests from around the world. Other countries had their own versions of Victoria's operation, often hidden behind seemingly benign community organizations. Our quantum sensitivity made us uniquely qualified to investigate these cases, leading to an international effort to regulate quantum technology and protect human consciousness from manipulation. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, the full impact of the Oakridge Heights incident was still unfolding. My consulting firm had grown into an international organization with offices in 6 countries, each dedicated to investigating and preventing quantum-based human rights violations. The lessons I'd learned from that terrifying experience had become a blueprint for protecting communities worldwide. The most profound changes weren't just in our work, but in how we understood human potential. The quantum sensitivity I'd developed had evolved in unexpected ways. Working with researchers at Mr. Chen's foundation, we discovered that the ability to interact with quantum fields wasn't limited to those exposed to Victoria's experiments. It was a latent human capability that her technology had forcibly awakened. The human brain naturally operates on quantum principles, Mr. Chen explained during a presentation to international scientists. What Victoria did was dangerous and unethical, but it revealed something important about human consciousness. We're all connected to the quantum fabric of reality. Some of us just learned to access it in a traumatic way. This understanding led to breakthrough developments in ethical quantum research. Instead of forcing changes through external fields, scientists began developing ways to help people safely explore their natural quantum potential. The Oakridge Heights survivors became valuable partners in this research, our experiences helping to shape protocols that protected human rights while advancing human knowledge. The children of Oakridge Heights continued to amaze us. As they grew older, their unique abilities flourished in ways we hadn't anticipated. They didn't just interact with technology, they innovated it, developing new interfaces between human consciousness and quantum systems. We established a special academy to nurture their gifts while ensuring they understood the ethical implications of their capabilities. We're not just teaching them how to use their abilities, our head educator explained. We're teaching them why responsibility and ethics must guide their development. They're living proof that human evolution doesn't have to come through force or manipulation. The original Oakridge Heights site became a center for quantum research and education. The sealed facility served as a stark reminder of what happens when science is pursued without ethics, while the new research center above it represented hope for a better future. Visitors from around the world came to learn from our experience and see firsthand how communities could recover from technological exploitation. My own abilities had stabilized into something I could control and understand. The random technological interactions and overwhelming sensations had given way to a refined awareness of quantum fields and digital systems. I could choose when to engage with these abilities, using them to help others rather than being controlled by them. The support group for Oakridge Heights survivors evolved into a global network of quantum-sensitive individuals. We shared experiences, techniques for managing our abilities, and most importantly, the emotional weight of our shared trauma. Some members had become respected scientists, others worked in technology or medicine, but all were committed to ensuring nothing like Victoria's experiments ever happened again. The real victory, Rachel told me during a late-night strategy session, isn't just in stopping these illegal operations, it's in showing the world that there's a better way forward. Every community we help, every person we protect, is proof that human advancement doesn't require sacrificing human rights. Victoria's network continued to unravel. Our investigations exposed connections to various research institutions, technology companies, and even government agencies. Each revelation led to reforms and new regulations governing quantum technology and human experimentation. The HOA structure that had once provided perfect cover for abuse was now under intense scrutiny worldwide. The most rewarding cases were the ones where we prevented history from repeating itself. In a small town in Oregon, we identified a quantum research operation before it could fully implement its control systems. In Singapore, we helped local authorities shut down a smart city project that was actually a massive consciousness manipulation experiment. Each success helped heal the wounds from our own experience, Some nights, standing in my rebuilt backyard and looking at the stars, I could feel the quantum fields humming around me, not as an intrusive force, but as a natural part of reality I'd learned to perceive. The garden I'd once fought so hard to protect had become a peaceful retreat where I could reflect on how far we'd come. Mr. Chen often joined me for evening conversations, sharing tea and memories of Ellen. "She would be proud," he said one night, "not just of exposing the truth, but of how we've turned that truth into positive change. That's the real justice, creating something better from something terrible." Today, 5 years after the Oakridge Heights incident, I'm sitting in my home office looking out at the transformed neighborhood that started it all. The Quantum Research Center stands where Victoria's underground facility once was, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the suburban homes around it. Instead of hiding in the shadows, scientists now work openly to understand the relationship between human consciousness and quantum fields. The settlement money helped rebuild our community, but it was the shared experience that truly transformed us. Those who chose to stay formed a unique bond, our quantum sensitivity creating connections that went beyond normal neighborhood relationships. We established a real HOA, one focused on genuine community support rather than control and manipulation. Victoria remains in quantum isolation, her last appeal denied 6 months ago. The specialized facility holding her has become a model for containing individuals who abuse quantum technology. Regular reports indicate she still believes in her twisted vision of forced human evolution, but her ability to harm others has been permanently neutralized. The international impact of our story continues to grow. Last week, I spoke at a UN conference on quantum human rights, sharing our experience with delegates from around the world. The protocols we developed for detecting and preventing quantum-based exploitation have been adopted by over 40 countries. Our consulting firm now trains government agencies and private organizations in identifying signs of consciousness manipulation attempts. The most important lesson, I told the delegates, isn't about the technology itself. It's about the choice between using power to control people and using it to empower them. Victoria chose control. We're choosing empowerment. Mr. Chen's research foundation has made remarkable progress in understanding natural quantum consciousness. Working with willing volunteers, they've developed safe methods for exploring human quantum potential. The children of Oakridge Heights, now entering their teens and 20s, are leading the way in this research, their innate abilities helping to map the boundaries of human quantum interaction. Each discovery confirms what we've suspected, Mr. Chen explained during a recent foundation meeting. Human consciousness naturally exists in a quantum state. Victoria's crime wasn't in revealing this truth, it was in forcing it through violation and control. The support network for quantum-sensitive individuals has expanded globally. We've identified others who developed abilities naturally without exposure to artificial fields. These natural sensitives have become valuable partners in our work, helping to distinguish between healthy quantum development and artificial manipulation. Rachel's legal team has successfully prosecuted over 30 cases involving illegal quantum experimentation. Each case adds to our understanding of how to protect communities from technological exploitation. The legal framework we've developed is being studied in law schools as a model for addressing emerging technologies that affect human consciousness. My own quantum sensitivity has become a natural part of who I am. The burning touch of that prototype generator left scars on my hands, but it also opened my mind to possibilities I never imagined. I can sense the quantum fields flowing through reality, interact with digital systems through thought, and connect with others who share similar abilities. These gifts, forced upon us through trauma, have become tools for preventing others from suffering the same fate. Looking back, I realized that Victoria's real failure wasn't in her science. It was in Her humanity. She saw people as test subjects, data points in her grand experiment. She never understood that true evolution comes through choice, understanding, and respect for human dignity. The garden where this all started has bloomed again. The roses Mrs. Martinez loved still grow there, tended now by a new generation of neighbors who understand the importance of community. The quantum energy lingering in the soil has created unique patterns in the flowers, subtle variations that only those with our sensitivity can perceive. Last month, we held a memorial service for Ellen Chen and the others who lost their lives to Victoria's ambition. The Quantum Research Center dedicated its main building in their names, ensuring that their sacrifice will never be forgotten. Mr. Chen spoke at the ceremony, his words touching everyone present. From tragedy, we found truth. From loss, we gained purpose. From darkness, we created light. Our community was meant to be an experiment in control. Instead, it became an example of resilience, of how people can face the unthinkable and emerge stronger. As I write this final reflection, I'm aware of the quantum fields flowing around me, connecting everything in subtle ways Victoria never understood. She sought to force evolution through control and fear. What she created instead was a community of people dedicated to protecting others from the very thing she tried to impose. The HOA, that was meant to cage us, became the key to our liberation. The technology intended to control us became a tool for empowerment, and the nightmare that was supposed to break us became the foundation for something powerful and positive. Remember, if something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Document everything. Stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. The truth always finds its way to the light, and sometimes the darkest experiences lead to the brightest futures. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.